Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So we'll start off talking about cartilage. And in our skeleton, cartilage provides a resiliency to the forces, and it is also, I don't know how to say this word, when something can bounce off the walls. How do we call this objects? You know, like a ball that you can throw on the floor and it'll jump up. Huh? Well, yeah, they kind of bounce, see these guys. Huh? Elastic. Thank you. So they're sort of elastic. They can be deformed to a certain extent. What gives them that elasticity is water. Important thing is that cartilage contains no blood vessels or nerves. So lack of nerves implies that we cannot feel the pain in the cartilage. The fact that there are no blood vessels, what does that mean? What implication in terms of health does it have? Did anyone ever rip the cartilage? Perforate? Nothing? No? It heals awfully long time. It takes a lot of time to heal it because there is no direct supply of nutrients and oxygen or white blood cells. So when cartilage is torn, it takes a while for molecules to diffuse and repair it. It is surrounded by perichondrium, and I was very smart to put all the pictures on the board right behind the screen. That was very, very, very strategically correct, perfect move. So instead I'm going to doodle on the screen. So it is surrounded by perichondrium. Okay, and perichondrium is dense connective tissue which contains blood vessels and doesn't let the cartilage to grow outwards. Inside of the perichondrium is the matrix. I'm not going to draw anything in the matrix. What's important is that in the matrix you have formations that are called lacunae. Inside of lacunae you have one or two cells that form cartilage. Cells that are called chondrocytes. Chondrocytes produce matrix and are derived from so-called chondroblasts. There are three types of cartilage in our skeleton. The hyaline cartilage, which is probably the most abundant. The elastic cartilage, which can be found only in two locations, and fibrocartilage. So hyaline cartilage serves the basic needs of support and flexibility and can be found almost everywhere in the places like intercostal cartilage or ligaments, tendons, articular cartilage of the bones. Elastic cartilage can be found in only two places. Those places are ear and epiglottis. Epiglottis is the little valve that closes our trachea when we swallow. Fibrocartilage is very thick and it can very well resist to the high pressure. So it can be found in the areas with the highest load, let's put it this way. Precisely, it will be intervertebral discs and menisci in the kneecap. Here's the location of the major types of cartilages, and you can see the elastic cartilage here and in the epiglottis. Blue are the hyaline cartilage that you can find in intercostal cartilage or the nose cartilage, and red is the fibrocartilage. Intervertebral disc, pubis symphysis, and menisci of the knee. Cartilage can grow, it can become wider or wider on the sides or wider in the middle. So oppositional growth is when cells secrete the matrix against the face of the cartilage, where now, so here's going to be the oppositional growth. Interstitial growth is when chondrocytes that are inside of the cartilage start to divide, pushing the cartilage from within. Does it make sense? But in both cases, the cartilage pretty much grows wide. Cartilage can calcify, and that happens during the normal bone growth. When chondrocytes die, cartilage binds to the calcium salts. What I want to highlight here is that calcified cartilage is not a bone. It is a calcified cartilage. However, this step, calcification of cartilage, is a very important step in the bone growth and remodeling. Let's talk about the bones now. There are 206 bones, and I almost want you to know all of them. It's not that big of a deal, especially if you imagine there's plenty of vertebrae, plenty of ribs, couple of radius, couple of ulnus, couple of femurs. So it's not that much, right? It's actually much less names. So bones can be divided into two large groups: the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. Axial skeleton is represented by the skull, the vertebral column, the thoracic cage, sternum, pelvic girdle, and pectoral girdle. And appendicular skeleton is the skeleton of the limbs. So here's going to be your axial skeleton. Make sense? And here is the appendicular skeleton. Bones can be easily classified by shape: long, short, flat, and irregular. Let me ask you something. This, the humerus that I'm holding, is that a short, long, flat, or irregular? What do you think? Long. Okay. What about this guy? Irregular, short. Any other versions? It's a long bone. What about this? The distal phalanx. You probably don't see it because it's too small. Long, short, flat, or irregular? This one. What do you think?
Short.
Long. Every bone that is longer than it is wide, makes sense? That is a long bone. If the bone length is higher than the bone width, it's the long bone. Make sense? Of course, there are exceptions, and we'll talk about them. Not exceptions, just, you would... What do you think about ribs? What are they? Huh? Short. Any other versions? Come on. Irregular. Flat. They actually flat. Although you would look at them and say, they long, right? They're long. Why are they flat? Well, because the structure, internal structure of the long bone is very different from the internal structures, the short, flat, or irregular bones. So long bones. Almost all bones of the limbs, except for the bones, the wrist, these ones, lunatus, scaphoid, and bones of the foot, such as calcaneus or tarsal bones. I forgot that. That's embarrassing. Also, one more short bone that you got to know is a patellar bone here, sesamoid bone. So patellar bone is a short bone that also belongs to the type of the bones that are called sesamoid bones. They can be found in tendons, and their role is not yet clear. What I want you to know is that patellar bone is a short bone. Flat bones, they're thin, they're flat, they may be slightly curved. Most bones of the skull are flat bones. Well, when I say most, I'm not entirely correct, because most, I mean occipital bone to temporal bones to parietal bones, frontal bone. When we start to talk about the mandible, maxilla, this ethmoid bone, the sphenoid bone that are inside, the lacrimal bone, those bones are all going to be irregular. Irregular bones don't have any particular shape. Does it make sense? What do you think vertebrae is going to be? Huh? Irregular. What about the scapula? Nope, flat. Yeah, that was a puzzle for me too when I first learned it. But scapula is not an irregular bone, it's a flat bone. In fact, if we can go over major bones of the skeleton right now and kind of figure out what they are. We went over the cranium, right? So bones of the cranium are mostly flat bones. Do we agree on that? Facial bones are mostly irregular bones. Vertebrae, vertebral bones, irregular. Sternum, flat. Ribs, clavicle, long. Scapula, except for the wrist. Metacarpals and phalanx. Carpals, short. Os coxae, irregular. Except for tarsals. I recall the name of that bone, calcaneus talus. It's talus. Jesus. So that's just another illustration of the types of the bones. And let's talk about functions of the bones. There are 7 of them. And I would put this 5 as the major ones. I'm going to ask 7 anyway. But, well, kind of think about what's important, what's more important, what's less important. First of all, bones, as mineralized connective tissue, provide us with the support, protection, and ability to move. There was a short story by was it American? American sci-fi writer Ray Bradbury about the guy who hated his skeleton and finally pulled all the bones out of him. Very nice story, about 3 pages. Very terrifying. Loved it. In the end, he was like a giant amoeba on the floor without any shape. Bone provides us with the storage for calcium, and also it stores certain growth factors. Why do we need calcium? We didn't learn that yet. Muscle contraction. Calcium is absolutely critical for proper work of the muscles. It is absolutely necessary for the blood coagulation and multiple other functions. Formation of blood cells occurs in the red bone marrow, which is in the bones. Virtually all blood cells that are in your blood were formed in the red bone marrow. In kids, it's almost all the bones. In adults, it's flat bones and the heads of humerus and femur. It also stores fat, mostly in adults. What I say mostly is in kids, You have red bone marrow. In adults, red bone marrow turns into yellow bone marrow, and yellow bone marrow is pretty much fat. And in the end, bones can produce a hormone that is called osteocalcin. Let's talk about each function in a little bit more details. So first of all, support. It holds up all the internal organs together. Protection. Well, look at the skeleton. Protects brain. Protects organs of thoracic cavity. Which organs, by the way? Who can tell me? Heart. What else? Lungs. Anything else? Not that much. What do you? Stomach is pretty much in the middle. It's liver. Liver. What about hip bones? What do they protect? Say again? Reproductive organs. When woman carries a baby, that's pretty much a bed for a baby. Protects the fetus. Movements. Without the bones, the skeleton is the system of levers. That's why we can use our muscles effectively. Storage of minerals and growth factors. So it stores calcium and phosphorus, which is required for the normal growth of the organism. Formation of blood cells. Hematopoiesis. If this is an adult, then it's going to be in the head of the femur. Storage of fat in the bone cavities in the adults. And osteocalcin is the very interesting hormone. First of all, it regulates the formation of the bones, and second, it is known to exert activities similar to the activities of insulin. So it will lower blood sugar, sort of prevent diabetes. So it is it prevents glucose intolerance. So it's insulin-like hormone. Can we consider bones an organ? Yes, we can. The major signature of an organ is that organ is composed of multiple tissues. What kinds of tissues can you name from top of your head if you think about the skeleton? Go beyond that gentleman, the Benjamin, and think, what do we have in the bone? Bone is what kind of tissue? Connective. Is it vascularized? Do we have? Yeah, we have blood vessels in the bone. So blood vessels, what kinds of tissues do we have in blood vessels? Nervous, okay. What about the lining, inside lining of the blood vessel? What kind of tissue is that? Epithelial. And we can kind of pull their muscle tissues that are attached to the bone. Make sense? Okay. So we can talk about the bones on three levels. Level of the gross anatomy, the microscopic level, and the chemical level. So on the gross anatomy level, let me find the bones here. I don't think I have the proper one. Okay, I'll wander around, and I think you have bones in the disarticulated human skeleton in the cabinets in your tables, in your working table. So go ahead, pull them out, look at them, use them. You know, Maria, you have skulls on your right. Yeah, should have it there. awesome, isn't it? Okay, let's talk about the structure of the bone. If we will, yeah, that would be a nice necklace. I know. The spines of your killed enemies. Okay, so bone, any bone can be. Well, bones by the structure can be divided. No, it's not going to bite you. No, it's not going to bite you. Bones can be divided into two major classes: the spongy bone and the compact bone. Unfortunately, I'm not able to. Wait. Let me get all the way. Okay, the spongy bone and the compact bone. So here's your spongy bone. Take a look. And that is the layer of a compact bone on both sides. And if you would magnify how the spongy bone look like, you're going to see those multiple trabeculae of the spongy bone with a lot of empty spaces between them. So spongy bone is inside. I'm gonna use as an example a long bone such as femur. Spongy bone is inside of the heads of the bone, right here. So it's going to be spongy. Okay. It is also called cancellous bone. And compact bone, which is sometimes called lamellar bone, is the dense outer layer of pretty much any bone. In the short, irregular, flat bones, if you will cut them across, you will find thin planes of spongy bone covered by compact bone, pretty much like a sandwich. When you have a burger in the middle and two pieces of bread above and under. So each plate of compact bone is sandwiched by itself between two connective tissue membranes, periosteum, which is on the outer side, and endosteum. So if this is the plate of compact bone, this is going to be periosteum, and this is going to be endosteum. Inside of the spongy bone, you will find bone marrow. What's important is that in a flat bone like this, you will not find bone marrow cavity. You will find bone marrow cavity in the long bone like that. Will be inside, right? But no bone marrow cavity in the flat or irregular or short bone. Bone marrow feels the trabeculae, intertrabecular spaces of the spongy bone. Does it make sense? Bone marrow. Okay? The surfaces of the bones that come in contact with each other are covered with articular cartilage. To avoid confusion, I want to explain now. When we talk about hyaline cartilage, or elastic cartilage, or fibrous cartilage, we talk about cartilages with different structure and different function. What is articular cartilage? Articular cartilage is the layer of hyaline cartilage that covers so-called articular surfaces. Now, what is articular surface? Can anyone tell me? What is articular surface? Articular surface of the bone is the surface that comes in contact with another bone. Here, for instance, the capitulum of the humerus will be an articular surface. Okay? Here, the articular surface of the radius. The trochlear notch of the ulna, which I can show you without risking to break the bones of that gentleman. The trochlear notch of the... Okay, let me use... So, this is the articular surface of the femur. Medial and lateral condyle. Okay? This is the articular surfaces of the tibia. They both are covered with articular cartilage to decrease friction. You know when people have multiple knee scope surgeries when they have cartilage removed? Pretty much when you have constant injury of the knee, cartilage becomes inflamed, and in order to get rid of that inflammation, quite often drugs can't help. So that cartilage is surgically removed from the knee. What happens eventually is that, of course, there's no inflammation, but you cannot normally walk because when there's no cartilage, bones literally scrub against each other. And that is quite an unpleasant and painful sensation. So, long bone. Unfortunately, I don't have, or at least I don't see, the cut across long bone, so I'm going to maybe doodle some of that structure on the slides. So first of all, any long bone, and sorry for my doodling, consists of three major parts. Diaphysis, which is the tubular part of the bone, right here. Tubular means that inside it is empty. And two epiphyses. Now I want to ask you, so first of all, this is the femur, okay? This part of the femur that is called head articulates with acetabulum in the pelvis. This part, condyles, articulates with tibia. This is epiphysis and this is epiphysis. How would we tell apart this epiphysis from this? How would we call them? Hint, recall anatomical terminology. This epiphysis, proximal and distal epiphysis. So epiphysis that is closer to the trunk is going to be proximal, the farther is going to be distal. So in the epiphysis, on the inside you have a compact bone, and on the outside, pardon me, and on the inside it's going to be a spongy bone. Okay? On the outside it is covered with articular cartilage. Does it make sense? Only if the surface articulates with something. So for instance, this part of epiphysis is not going to be covered with articular cartilage. It doesn't articulate with any other bones. Between the epiphysis and diaphysis, someplace here, so-called epiphyseal line. It is a remainder of epiphyseal growth plate which exists in children when the bone is actually growing. Our bones, do you know till which age on average the bones are growing? Any ideas? Give me your wild guess. 75, okay? In females. In males? 21. So here's the structure of the long bone. This is going to be the proximal epiphysis. That is going to be the distal epiphysis. On the outside, in the place of articulation, it is covered with articular cartilage. You can see the spongy bone, the epiphyseal line, the periosteum, connective tissue membrane that covers the outer surface of the bone, the compact bone layer that pretty much forms the shaft, the diaphysis, the medullary cavity, which houses in adults yellow bone marrow, and the nutritional artery or nutrient artery that gets inside of the bone via the opening called nutrient foramen. If we'll magnify the picture a little bit more, what we're going to find is, and here we're looking at the part of the bone that is close to articular surface. So you will see articular cartilage, you will see compact bone, and you will see the spongy bone. And if you look really closely here, you see that brownish covering. Can you see that? What I'm circling here? So that covering is called endosteum. Endosteum covers all internal surface of the bone. Does it make sense? It's very thin and delicate connective tissue membrane. So periosteum is dense, tough, how to say, mechanically solid layer of connective tissue which is attached to the bone matrix via so-called Sharpie's fibers. Those Sharpie's fibers provide, they're very dense at the places where they have to enter tendons and ligaments. Periosteum is so-called osteogenic layer that contains osteogenic stem cells or osteoprogenitor cells. Those osteoprogenitor cells, as we will learn, give rise to cells that are called osteoblasts and are the first step in the bone growth. Also, periosteum contains a lot of nerve fibers and blood vessels. Inside membrane, that is called endosteum, is, as I mentioned, a delicate connective tissue that covers trabeculae of the spongy bone and internal surface of the medullary cavity. It also covers the surface of the canals that pass through the compact bones. There are two types of those canals: perforating canals and central canals. The perforating canals are called Volkmann's canals, and central canals are called Haversian canals. These guys, the endosteum, also contains the osteogenic stem or osteoprogenitor cells that will differentiate into osteoblasts and then into osteocytes. So if we'll take a closer look at that box, remember, let me show you this box, and we'll go here. Endosteum lines the internal surface of the medullary cavity. Yellow bone marrow is the fat storage. Compact bone provides the mechanical rigidity to the diaphysis. Periosteum, as you can see, is attached to the matrix of the compact bone by perforating fibers, Sharpie's fibers. In the long bone, well, not in every long bone. So long bones in kids and some parts of long bones in adults contain red bone marrow. Red bone marrow will produce all, as I mentioned, all blood cells in your body. So in adults, you will find more of it in a spongy bone and diploid of the flat bones, sternum. In the long bones, you will find it in medullary cavities of the long bones of newborns, because they need a lot of new, especially white blood cells, to fight off the infections. Now, in adults, you will find them in the heads of femur and humerus, and if necessary, yellow bone marrow, this one, can convert into red bone marrow. On the bones, you can find certain markings. Let me go over the markings and we'll take a break. On the bones, you can find markings. Take a look at this. Those are markings, kind of irregular shape. This is the marking. This is the marking. Can you see that? This is the marking. This is the marking. So I want you to be familiar with the names of the markings, to be able to understand when you read something like foramen or tuberosity what we're talking about. So those markings represent sites for the muscle or ligament or tendon attachment. They may also be a part of the surfaces of a joint, like condyle, or they may be passageways for nerves and blood vessels. They can be divided into the projections. Okay, that's a projection. Depressions. Let me find a neat depression. Oh, this is the depression. It's actually an opening. I would rather say it's an opening. So it's opening, and let me see if I can find a decent depression over here. Nothing that comes into mind right away. Well, we'll figure it out. So projections. They're usually generated by the muscle pull. Depressions and openings, as I mentioned, they usually serve for the blood vessels and nerves to go through the bone or in the surface of the bone. So here are the projections. Crest, the iliac crest, spine. Don't know if you can see that. The microscope is not in the right place for me. Spine, that's going to be initial spine. Trochanter, which you can find only on the femur. Okay, two trochanters. Intertrochanteric line, which is the a little prominence that is smaller than the crest. Tubercle, right here, small projection. Epicondyle, the raised area over the condyle, which is right here. And the process, pretty much any prominence. Those are going to be spinal processes. Those are going to be transverse processes of the vertebrae. Markings that are associated with the joints. Head of the rib can be found closer to the vertebrae. That's the head. And it articulates with the transverse process of the vertebrae. Facet. Facet is the surface of the bone that articulates with often another facet. What's important? That is the flat surface. So if I would be able to take that rib out and look at the vertebrae, and let me see if I have. Yes, I do have vertebrae. Plenty of them actually. So this kind of flat surfaces, I don't know if you can see that. So these flat surfaces are facets. These are the facets. Okay? Flat surface that articulates with another bone. Condyle is the rounded articular projection. Condyles. And ramus the bar of the bone right here. You can find grooves, which I won't be able to find on this dude right now, but what I'll be able to find is a fissure. If you'll take the skull and look in its eyes, you will see that inside the orbit there is a small opening that is called intraorbital fissure. Foramen is a round opening, and I can give you one foramen right now. That's the foramen magnum. A vertebral column goes inside of the cranium. Notch is the, so here's the notch, indentation. Actually, it's right here. Notch, indentation on the surface of the structure. What's up?
You said the foramen is this little
Hole
down there?
It's not little. It's probably the largest
Not little,
foramen.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean.
No, it's the largest. I can show you another foramen. You see that?
Which one?
The little hole on the mandible.
Yeah.
That's mandibular foramen. Mental foramen, pardon me. That is the foramen. So this dude is the largest hole in the skeleton.
Okay, well the large hole right here.
Yeah,
Is that where the brain stem would go through?
pretty much. Yeah. Yeah.
And then through the little holes in the back of the eye, is that where the
Oculomotor nerves.
would go through and connect to your brain and stuff?
You're absolutely right. So other openings, meatus, which I believe is the only one. Acoustic meatus. The hole in the side of the cranium. That's where the sound goes. Sinus, which I won't be able to show here, but it's the pretty much empty. Oh, what? The empty space. No. Well, sinuses, like nasal sinus, the cavities that are filled with mucus when you have a runny nose. And fossa is the depression in the bone that always serves as that tutorial space. This is the fossa. I mistakenly got it as a notch. So we will stop at the microscopic anatomy. So now let's try and talk about the microscopic anatomy of the bone. So in the bone you will find four different tissue types, four different cell types, I'm sorry. Osteogenic cells, osteoblasts, osteocytes, and bone lining cells, they all come from one precursor, which is osteogenic cell. Osteoclasts come from macrophages, cells that are produced by the bone marrow. So osteogenic or osteoprogenitor cells are mitotically active. What does it mean, mitotically active? It means that they can divide. They can divide. So they're located in periosteum and endosteum, and upon stimulation, the different factors, they can differentiate into osteoblasts or bone lining cells. Of course, not all of them differentiate. They always have certain reserve of osteogenic cells. When osteogenic cells differentiate into osteoblasts, these osteoblasts secrete bone matrix, or so-called osteoid. So now, when we say bone matrix, that means kind of a softer tissue, not even tissue, softer compound that is composed of a number of proteins. This compound didn't bind the calcium phosphate yet. So osteoid essentially consists of collagen. Collagen represents about 90% of all the protein in the bone, and multiple proteins that will bind calcium and will help bone to become harder. Osteoblasts can also divide. So here's the example, the illustration. Of course, it's not. Yeah.
So I thought you said it was the chondrocytes.
Chondrocytes are the cells of the. Good notice. Chondrocytes. No. They're just to avoid that confusion. Chondrocytes are the cells that you can find in the cartilage. Yes. Cartilage. Chondrocytes. Okay? So cartilage and bone are two different tissues. Cartilage does not become a bone. It becomes calcified, but it's not a bone. And you will see when we will talk about the bone growth, how it happens. So stem cells is kind of a squamous, elongated cell, and osteoblasts have pretty much a regular shape. Regular cell. Osteocytes is the product of the differentiation of osteoblasts. These are mature bone cells that are sitting in the lacunae. They don't secrete bone matrix in amount as osteoblasts do, but they monitor the conditions under which bone matrix exists. They monitor the bone, okay? They're kind of watchers. And they also repairmen, so they maintain bone matrix. So they act as sensors for stress or the strain. When the bone is being under certain kind of stress, and it is normal. When I'm saying stress, it's normal. When you're running, is it a stress for the bone? Yes, it's normal stress. When did you see jockeys? I don't know. Am I pronouncing that right? The guys who ride the horses.
Yeah.
Jockeys. The legs, curved legs. Constant stress because they constantly have to ride the horse. That's the stress. So both osteocytes will sense that kind of a stress, and they will trigger the response that will lead to the osteoclasts destroying the bone, which is a normal process. By destroying, I mean they will take out part of the bone in one location so that osteoblasts can build the bone in another location. This is called the bone remodeling. Does it make sense? It's like when, yes?
So a stress would be obviously like running, or like if, like you said, a jockey on a horse.
Mm-hmm.
So what would a strain be?
Strain?
Yeah, like if you were straining it.
Well, let's say you do some kind of exercise that puts that kind. So that would be a stress.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say you're weightlifting. You make the stress on the femur constantly. How femur can counteract the stress? It can become thicker, right? You make, I don't know if you can see because I can bend this thing obviously. You bend this.
Oh.
So there's some kind of activity that you do. When you bend this will put the strain on this side of the bone. Does it make sense? And that will lead to the remodeling. We will talk about that as well. So bone lining cells, they're flat cells on the surface of the bone, periosteal cells on the external surface, and endosteal cells on the internal surface. And they are believed to also help to maintain bone matrix. But the exact function is not yet known terribly well. So those, again, 4 types of cells that are either osteoprogenitor cells or related to them. So osteoprogenitor cells give rise to osteoblasts. Let me put it this way. Osteoprogenitor cells become osteoblasts. They become osteocytes. And osteoblasts will become bone lining cells. Okay? Osteoclasts. They are derived from macrophages. What do macrophages do? Macrophages. Phages. Something is phage. What does it do? Huh? Eats. It eats. So those are cells that eat stuff. Macro. Big. Yeah, big eaters. Macrophages are big eaters. They are phagocytic cells. That's another name for them. So in this case, osteoclasts, not only large, they're actually gigantic, and they have multiple nuclei. What do you think it means? That is not related to the bone. I just want to test your thinking. So the fact that the cell is multinucleated, how did this cell how this cell got generated? What do you think? So you have a cell that has many nuclei, 5 nuclei. What would you think happened before it became?
You're saying they're made up
from macrophages?
So just multiple macrophages kind of join together into one cell?
Absolutely. Excellent. Very good answer. Multiple macrophages fused together. So they are product of cell fusion. So they sit in the place that is called resorption bay. Pretty much resorption is what they do. And they have a ruffled border. Here's the ruffled border. Why do you think we have multiple invaginations of the surface? To increase surface area. When you see such perturbations, that is to increase surface area. Okay? Why do we need to increase surface area? It eats the bone. So if we increase the surface area, we will increase the contact area with the bone, so it can eat more bone at the same time. So it accelerates the degradation of the bone. Okay? And how would you think, we will talk about that, how would you think it will dissolve the bone? What would it use? Enzymes? How can you dissolve? So calcium phosphate, well, it's fairly close in terms of chemical properties to calcium carbonate. There is no calcium carbonate in this class, but if you'll go to the main campus, you'll find plenty of it. Chalk. How would you dissolve chalk? Never did? Dissolving chalk? Take a piece of chalk, drop it in vinegar. You will have a lot of bubbles. Any kind of acid. So they secrete acid and digestive enzymes. Can you tell me which organelle in the cell has a lot of acid and digestive enzymes? Which organelle in the cell has a lot of acid and digestive enzymes? Lysosome. So here is your osteoclast, which will dissolve the bone where it needed and when it is needed. And here's osteocyte. What I want to point out here is that, is that osteocyte has those dendrite-like projections. And I want you to kind of pay attention to them and remember them, okay? Remember that osteocytes has those dendrite-like projections. So if we would take a look at the compact bone. Let me remove my computer from here so I can get this. We take a look at the compact bone. What we're going to see is that it consists of the structural units. Can everyone see that model? Structural units that are called osteons. So those guys are osteons. Such tube, that is an osteon. They're also called eversion system. They consist of the tubes of the bone matrix, and each tube is called lamellae. You will take a look. Can you see? I don't know if you can see that. But what's important is that in each lamellae, collagen fibers are oriented in a different direction. So that makes lamellae very resistant to the twist. Make sense? Because collagen fibers are oriented in a different direction. Inside of each osteon, you can find a central canal which houses artery, vein, and the nerve. Between the lamellae, you're going to find, inside of lamellae, you're going to find lacunae, which house osteocytes. I'm going to do the projector mute for a second, okay? So you're going to see, I'm going to mark it here, show it here. You're going to see lacunae, which are connected by the little channels that are called canaliculi. Remember those dendritic projections of the osteocytes that we saw in the picture? Remember? These guys, the projections? These projections run through the canaliculi, allowing osteocytes to be connected to each other. Okay? Now, central canals are connected. Those are different central canals. They are connected by so-called Volkmann's or perforating canals. They connect central canals, blood vessels to each other, and all of it gets connected with the medullary cavity. How this canaliculi, I don't know if you can see this spider-like brownish guys, how this canaliculi are formed. You have osteoblasts that secretes the matrix. Okay, that's osteoblast cell. Secretes the matrix, and you have another osteoblast cell. So these osteoblasts form projections that get in touch with each other and form gap junctions. You with me so far? When matrix hardens, when it is calcified, osteoblasts become trapped in the hardened matrix, but they don't lose contact to each other. Osteoblasts become osteocytes, and those projections are being encased in the canaliculi. What I can compare it with is, imagine, I know that it's kind of a crazy picture, but imagine a giant pool filled with cement, and you have 5-7 people that are in that pool, heads up above the cement so they won't die, and they hold each other's hands. They can move while cement is still liquidish. When it hardens, they can't move anymore, right? But they can hold each other's hands. That's what happens to osteoblasts when matrix calcifies. Why is that important? Those guys, the osteocytes, they are monitors, sensors. So they can relay information to each other. Also, obviously, matrix isn't the best tissue to get nutrients and oxygen through. So through those canaliculi, nutrients and wastes can be transported across the bone. Lamellae can be divided in, except for lamellae that are the parts of the eversion system, you can also observe so-called circumferential lamellae. Here they are. They are immediately deep to the periosteum, and here, can you see those? These are immediately superficial to endosteum. So they provide kind of a structural framework for the diaphysis of the bone. Make sense? So they surround the bone on the outside and on the inside. And also you can find so-called interstitial lamellae, which are here, like this one or this one. They are either unfinished lamellae or the lamellae leftovers from the recent bone remodeling. We'll take a look in the picture. Here's going to be your osteon, or Haversian system, with a central canal or Haversian canal inside. Those are perforating or Volkmann's canals, and these are lamellae of the Haversian system. You can also see them on the microscopic picture, or in this microscopic picture. Between lamellae, you can see lacunae and osteocyte in the lacunae. Can you see those? And lacunae are connected by canaliculi. Circumferential lamellae provide additional structural framework for the diaphysis, and those interstitial lamellae, like here or here, they are, as I mentioned, leftovers from the previous generations of the osteons. When you take a look at the spongy bone, it looks like it's not terribly well organized. Okay? So those trabeculae doesn't look like they, have any order, although they lined up along the lines of stress. So they also help to resist it. What I want to highlight, if you'll cut one of the rods of this spongy bone across, you will not see any osteons. What you're going to see, if you cut across one of those rods, and I will try to make a picture. I know that my picture is going to be, to say the least, imperfect. So you have that cut. You will see lamellae, okay? On the cross section of one of these trabeculae, you will see lamellae. You will not see central canal. You will not see nerves. You will not see blood vessels. However, you will still see lacunae with osteocytes and canaliculi. So the major difference is that there is no Haversian system, there is no osteons in the spongy bone. Okay? If we'll go all the way down to the chemical composition of the bone, what we're going to see is protein and calcium salts. So cells that we already mentioned, some of them, such as osteoblasts, will produce a lot of matrix or osteoid. Osteoid, made up of the ground substance, which contains proteoglycans and glycoproteins. Do you know what glycan means? No? Sugar. Sugar. Glycan is sugar. Maybe long sugar, not necessarily sweet sugar, but it's sugar. So what is the difference between proteoglycans and glycoproteins? Can anyone tell me?
Sugar containing proteins, I guess?
So proteoglycans mean that it consists of what? Protein and sugar. What about glycoprotein? Huh? The explanation is very simple, actually. If you have more protein, it's glycoprotein. If you have more sugar, it's proteoglycan. This is it. So Those proteoglycans and glycoproteins will bind calcium, and collagen will provide both strength and certain flexibility to the bone. So, why do we think the bone can resist to the stress? Why it is not fragile? The idea is that collagen fibers form so-called sacrificial bones. Sacrificial bones can easily break when some kind of stress is applied to the bone. So I will try to explain it not very simple way, but hopefully it'll work out. So what is stress? What is stress? Stress is when we apply energy, right, to a certain object. Do you agree with me? When we apply energy to the object, we put object under stress. I'm applying energy and I'm putting the table under stress. Okay? Make sense? So we apply energy to the bone. In the bone you have two collagen fibers that are connected by the sacrificial bones. Okay? Those sacrificial bones, under the stress, will start to rip apart. The breakdown of each sacrificial bond requires energy. So this energy, instead of breaking bone in pieces, will kind of disconnect collagen fibers inside of the bone. So that energy will be absorbed by the bone without the major injury. Yes?
So like when I asked you earlier about if you if somebody face planted on their head or something, it would pretty much absorb the energy in that way.
It will be too much energy to absorb.
Could you, I know this is probably a stupid question, but can you bruise your bone? Like, is that possible?
What do you mean by bruising the bone?
Like, well, like you said, it won't break. It most likely won't break.
Oh, you mean incur the damage to the bone that will not involve fracture?
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. Of course you can. Your periosteum, the Sharpie's fibers, can be broken, so periosteum will detach from the bone matrix. Periosteum, the bone. Okay? It gets detached from the bone matrix. Since it gets detached, you can damage certain blood vessels. That can affect certain nerves. Ever heard about shin splints in runners? It's pretty much detachment of periosteum. This is also called periostitis. And yeah, so you can. It's kind of a bruising the bone. So that energy that will break down the sacrificial bonds will not break the bone as a whole. Okay? If, as you mentioned, the energy is too serious, too significant, the bone will break, so those bones will not save it from being fractured. So except for organic component, which is osteoid, the other 65% of the bone are comprised by hydroxyapatites, mineral salts. Essentially, that's the hydroxyapatite, calcium OHBO4. So that's a calcium phosphate, hydroxycalcium phosphate, that will be attached to the collagen fibers, and they are responsible for the hardness of the bone. In terms of the strength, bone is half as strong as the steel, and when we speak about the compression, and as strong as the steel if we speak about tension. To give you a theoretical example, if you'll take a human femur, and we'll find a way to put it vertically, and will find a way to put some kind of a platform on top of it, you can put a car on top of that platform and the bone will not break. So that is pretty strong. Another interesting feature, well, some of them are like Captain Obvious features. Bones can stay intact for quite a while after the death. So by digging the graves and looking at the bones of the people, you can figure out a lot of things about those people. Were they sick? Because when a person is seriously sick, yeah, I know. When a person is seriously thick, bones are going to be of a different shape, trust me. So when the person is seriously sick, then bone will stop growing and you will see the lines, the horizontal lines on the bones. Or, for instance, I think it's an interesting example. I don't know if I mentioned that book here, The Emperor of All Maladies. Did I mention? Strongly suggest get it somewhere. That's the biography of cancer, but we're not talking about cancer. What can you find out when you dig up the grave? Anthropologists dug out the graves of the South American natives in Chile that were like 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years old. I don't remember the exact dates. And they found one of the bone with an awkward deformity on it. So they called doctors. Doctors took a look and said, well, that's the bone sarcoma. It's cancer of the bone. It is believed to be the first case of cancer discovered in human. Doesn't mean that we never had cancer, I don't know, 50,000 years ago. It means that it's the first case of cancer that was physically discovered in the deceased person. So it was fairly well known even back then. So you can find this. I will give you another example about the role of the bones in research. So the bone structure is different between reptiles and mammals and birds, by the way. For instance, in birds, bones are empty inside. Why do you think? They hollow. Huh? Say again?
So they're lighter. Fly. So the bones are lighter.
Yeah, the bones are lighter, so they can fly easier, right? So that was when scientists looked at the ancient dinosaurs, figured out some of them were flying animals because their bones were hollow. Now, bones in the warm-blooded and cold-blooded animals have different structure. So scientists figured out that some of the dinosaurs are actually warm-blooded. Not like us, but still. So bones, as remains, can provide you immensely valuable information about what happened ages ago. So, how bone was developed during the prenatal development. So, bony skeleton forms at about 2 months of development. You may ask, what kind of skeleton do we have under 2 months? There are versions? Cartilage. It's cartilage. We have cartilage. And then cartilage is substituted by the bone. When we are born, bones grow up until 18 or 21 years, but when we become older, bones don't grow in length. We don't grow, right? I mean, we're not changing the size. But they can change their shape. They constantly undergo remodeling. So there are two types of ossification, bone development. Endochondral and intermembranous. Endochondral ossification happens when the bone replaces hyaline cartilage. In this case, the bone is called a cartilage or endochondral bone. That is the process that forms most of the skeleton during the skeletal development before the birth. Intramembranous ossification forms flat bones such as clavicles and cranial bones. And in this case, bone develops from the fibrous membrane. let's talk about endochondral ossification first. So most of the bones below the cranium, except for the clavicle, are formed as the result of endochondral ossification. So hyaline cartilage that comprises the skeleton of the baby, well, not yet baby, is kind of a model for the bone development. By the way, I made a mistake earlier. I said that it's a long bone. It is not. Clavicle, it is not a long bone. It's a flat bone. So, the cartilaginous skeleton provides a guidance for the bony skeleton to develop. Remember, I mentioned that hyaline cartilage never becomes a bone. So during the ossification, cartilage is destroyed and bone substitutes the cartilage. So it begins with a primary ossification center in the middle of a shaft. I'm going to use that as a model, although it's not a correct model. So eventually, blood vessels will get inside of perichondrium. Imagine this is the cartilage. I know that's an awful illustration. So cells in the perichondrium, in the cartilage, will be changed from chondrocytes to chondroblasts. Around the cartilage, the structure that is called a bone collar is formed. Pretty much it's the beginning of diaphysis as a bone, and then there goes central cartilage in the diaphysis that becomes calcified. When it becomes calcified, it starts to die and it develops cavity, which later will become medullary cavity. Then blood vessels will invade the future medullary cavity. Eventually, in the epiphysis, there will be secondary ossification centers. So it's like, like you watch those movies when people turn into the stone. Pretty much the same. You have cartilaginous structure that will in which cartilage will eventually be destroyed by osteoclasts, and instead of the cartilage, new bone will be formed. Let's look at it step by step. So first, you have primary ossification center and osteoblasts. From that ossification center, will produce so-called bone collar, which will surround the diaphysis of the future bone. And then cartilage matrix inside that primary ossification center will start to deteriorate, creating the cavity. Eventually, the structure that is called periosteal bud will bring blood vessels inside of the cavity in this mixture of the bone and the cartilage, helping to form a spongy bone. Secondary ossification centers in the both epiphyses, together with the blood vessels, will initiate the formation of the spongy bones in the both distal and proximal epiphysis. And at the time of the birth, you will have a children's long bone with a medullary cavity, to epiphysis, and the diaphysis. What I want to highlight specifically here is that you're going to have a cartilage in the place of epiphyseal growth plate. Why do we need this cartilage? Because this cartilage provides us, this cartilage is the means of the children's bones to grow. We will see how it goes. What happens in case of intramembranous ossification? The cranial bones, for instance. It will start with a membrane that consists of the fibrous connective tissue. Okay, pretty much similar to the long bone grows, endochondral bone grows. Ossification centers will appear in that membrane. And those ossification centers, osteoblasts, will secrete osteoid. Eventually, woven bone, together with the osteoid calcification, will be formed. Periosteum will be formed. And at the very last stage, lamellar bone, compact bone, will replace the woven bone, and red bone marrow will be formed from the blood vessels that were infiltrating the osteoid at the initial stages of the development. Yes?
So since we're talking about like bones growing and stuff, so small people, I guess that's the respectful way to call them. Yeah. Like short
Midgets.
people. Yes. No, I didn't know
Okay,
that.
that's fine.
So their disease is in their bones where they just don't grow anymore? Is it
We will get to the hormonal control of the bone growth, and that'll answer your question.
Oh, okay.
Let me not jump ahead, but that's a good
Oh,
question.
I didn't know if you were-
It's a very good question. So, in the intramembranous ossification, the first step would be the formation of ossification center with the osteoblasts that secrete osteoid. Okay? So, osteoid will form first trabeculae of the spongy bone, and osteoblasts that are trapped inside the osteoid will become osteocytes. Okay? Osteoid becomes calcified and develops the woven bone. You see that woven bone is very well vascularized. On the external surface, the condensation of the mesenchyme, the material of the fibrous membrane, that condensation will lead to the formation of periosteum. And during the last stage, the external surface of the woven bone will be substituted by the lamellar bone. So you will get a layer of lamellar or compact bone on the outside of the former membrane. Make sense? Lamellar bone. And inside and between those pieces of bread, you will have your burger. Trabeculae of the spongy bone. Blood vessels will turn into the red bone marrow. So when we grow, when we're already born and we start to grow, we can have two types of growth. We can have interstitial growth, increase in length of the bone, and we can have appositional growth, increase in the thickness of the bone. So interstitial growth is due to the existence of the epiphyseal plate. What is epiphyseal plate comprised of in the children? Cartilage. So we have a cartilage, okay? And what's important, it will grow on one side. Let's say it grows this way, okay? At the same time, it will be destroyed on the other side. And the rate of growth and rate of destruction balance each other. Does it make sense? So what we're going to have in the end is we're going to have epiphyseal growth plate that doesn't become thicker, doesn't become thinner, but moves to the ends of the bone. So it kind of pushes both epiphyses from the center of the bone, making the bone grow. Do you agree on that?
So the part that is destroying is becoming the spongy.
Say again?
This part of the cartilage is being destroyed becomes the spongy bone.
It doesn't become. It is just destroyed and substituted by the spongy bone. So we'll see. It again. It's kind of a modal, okay, a directional, a guidance for the bone to grow. So growth. So when the bone grows, there are 5 zones that can be different. How to say, isolated, differentiated inside of the cartilage. The resting zone, nothing happens. Proliferation zone, or the zone of growth. Hypertrophic zone, calcification and ossification zone. In the resting zone, that is the cartilage on the epiphyseal side of the plate. That's the resting zone, okay? That's going to be cartilage. I'm going to make it very unproportionally thick, okay? Resting zone. Proliferation zone is right next to the resting. It's going to be proliferation zone. Hypertrophic zone lies distal to proliferation, and in the hypertrophic zone you have all the chondrocytes. They have large lacunae, and those lacunae become eroded. So remember, lacunae in the chondrocytes, since they become larger, can you see that? They start to get connected to each other. In the calcification zone, chondrocytes are dead, and matrix of the cartilage becomes calcified, becomes solid. So what it's going to look like, do you know that cheese with the holes in it? A Swiss cheese, okay. Imagine that it becomes very, very solid. That is fairly what it's going to look like. It slowly becomes solid. From the cheesy appearance, it becomes like a stony appearance. Is that a bone? No, not yet. So you have pretty much a calcified cartilage at the junction between epiphysis and diaphysis. Here come osteoclasts. They come in and they destroy those fragments of calcified cartilage. And during that destruction, this space will be filled with a new bone that is provided by osteoblasts. Does it make sense? So, why does it stop? I mean, interstitial growth at 18 or 21. Because when we get closer to that age, chondroblast, they divide less often. And what happens essentially is that growth of the cartilage do not match its destruction. Make sense? So eventually epiphyseal plate will become thinner and thinner, and eventually will disappear, which is called the epiphyseal plate closure. So as we mentioned, 18 to 21 year, you still have epiphyseal line, which is a remainder of what it was. And that's the illustration of the bone growth process. Resting zone, nothing happens. Proliferation zone, active division of chondroblasts. Hypertrophic zone, chondrocytes become older, lacunae become larger and start to connect to each other. Calcification zone, where the matrix of the cartilage calcifies and cells die. And then in this zone, osteoclasts will eat up the calcified cartilage, and osteoblasts will substitute it with a new bone. Appositional growth is the growth of the bone that allows it to become thicker. For instance, as we mentioned, if you do weightlifting, even if you're 35, your bones will become thicker because they have to carry a larger weight. So what happens is osteoblasts that are located beneath the periosteum will secrete matrix on the external surface of the bone. Okay? Osteoclasts, I can show it, but imagine that you have osteoclasts inside of the bone they will remove bone on the endosteal side, from the inside of the tube. So you have a tube. Osteoblasts will build up the tube on the outside, and osteoclasts will destroy the tube walls from the inside. So ideally, I mean, if it would be balanced, then the thickness of the walls would not change. But osteoblasts in general work more active. They're more active than osteoclasts. So bone not only becomes wider, it walls becomes thicker. Here's the difference between the interstitial and appositional growth. In the interstitial growth, you have cartilage that grows on the distal side and being destroyed on the kind of proximal to the center side. So bone replaces the cartilage on the destroyed side. In case of bone remodeling, cartilage has nothing to do with it. It's osteoblasts that deposit bone on the outer surface and osteoclasts that destroy bone on the inner surface. Lenisa, here's your question. Regulation of the bone growth. So major hormones that regulate bone growth are growth hormone that is produced by hypophysis or pituitary gland, thyroid hormone, which is kind of secondary. By itself it can't do much, but it modulates the activity of the human growth hormone, and testosterone and estrogen that are responsible for the growth spurt during the adolescence, when people go through the sexual maturation and those hormones are actually being produced. So they actually close epiphyseal plate. They are responsible for the epiphyseal plate closure. Alterations in those hormones will cause the abnormal growth. Tell me what's going to happen if the person, the child, will experience release of growth hormone in excess when he or she, I don't know, a year old, 2 year old. What's going to happen? They're going to be huge in every dimension. I mean, they're going to be tall. Those are people who 8 feet tall or whatever, 8.5 feet tall. So that is the disease that is called gigantism. They usually die very early. You know why? Any ideas? It's a growth hormone that is overproduced. What kind of problems do you think they're going to have?
Heart problems.
Mm-hmm. Heart problems. They have cardiomyopathy. So the cardiac muscle is not developed properly. If people at the... Say again?
Sorry, how early do you think they go?
Oh, you mean when they die?
Yeah.
To my knowledge, it's about the latest, to what I heard, early 30s.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Now, if a child doesn't have enough of the growth hormone,
Like at all?
well, not in all, but very, very few.
That will be
Midget. This is called a pituitary dwarfism. What I want to highlight, gigantism and pituitary dwarfism are the conditions that can be developed when growth hormone is lacking in the childhood. Now, not related to the bone, well, kind of related to the bone growth. What if an adult, normally developing adult, well, kind of sort of normally developing adult, at the age of, let's say, 18, will start to stick herself or himself with a growth hormone, or there will be some kind of a genetic problem that will lead to the increased production of the growth hormone. What will happen? Adult. A person in whom bones cannot grow interstitially. Hmm? Do you know how this condition is called? It is called acromegaly. And you might have run in those people. I mean, it's fairly common condition, and especially if you would Google acromegaly image, it's really stunning to see the time lapse. A person can look absolutely normal, bless you, at the age of 18. Slight changes can be noticeable at the age of 25, and at the age of 45 you see this massive jaw, massive head. Another example, professional athletes, bare bones, your head just doesn't grow because of exercise. And that growth hormone is actually used as the performance enhancement drug, but the funny thing is that studies didn't prove it effective. So it can lead to acromegaly, it can lead to heart problems. And dysregulation of testosterone can cause early puberty, like at 6 years old, children can go to puberty. I don't remember the name of the disease, but it's a complex dysregulation of the adrenal glands. Okay, homeostasis of the bone. We have time to talk a little bit about that. So the bone is being recycled at the constant rate. Okay. Remember when we were talking about the skin, we were talking about the fact that we pretty much through our life we go through the weight of the skin that is equivalent to our own weight. Bone, well, not exactly the same, but imagine this: spongy bone in our body is replaced on average every 3 to 4 years, and every 10 years all compact bone in our body is replaced. Of course, certain layers of compact bone are replaced faster, certain slower. For instance, articulate surfaces of the femur, these ones, can be replaced every 6 months. Why do we need it to get replaced? It's a bone. What can happen to it? Well, calcium phosphate is getting crystallized constantly, and since we get more calcium phosphate crystals, the bone becomes more brittle. And if it's brittle, it can get fractured. So, bone remodeling, change of the shape, deposition of the bone, and resorption of the bone. I want to tell you, so be advised here that remodeling and oppositional growth aren't the same. Oppositional growth is the type of remodeling. But for instance, if you have a muscle that constantly pulls on the bone will thicken at this particular place. Okay? So special groups of cells, groups of osteoblasts and osteoclasts, they're called remodeling units, are responsible for the changes in the bone shape. Deposition of the bone can be observed, well, kind of traces of the deposition can be observed via so-called osteoid seam that can be observed on the surface of the bone, and it's the band of the bone matrix that is not yet mineralized, and the front of calcification. So that is the transition zone that is formed between the older bone and the fresh osteoid seam. What can trigger the deposition of the bone? Probably mechanical signals, probably changes in the concentration of calcium and phosphate in the endosteal cavity. Matrix proteins will bind and concentrate that calcium, and apparently enzyme that is called alkaline phosphatase is required for the bone mineralization. Resorption of the bone. What is the resorption? It is the dilution of the bone by osteoclasts. Osteoclasts will dig bone down, breaking down its matrix, and we already mentioned that that effect on matrix will be mediated by protons, the acid, and lysosomal enzymes. Okay? Calcium cannot be diluted by lysosomal enzymes, it can be diluted only by acid. So they will dilute the matrix, eat it up together with dead osteocytes, and then eject it into the blood. When resorption of the certain area of the bone is done, osteoclasts will die. Why do they need to die? What happens if they don't die? What do you think? Osteoclasts don't die.
They just get weaker and weaker. Right? If they don't die.
Osteoclasts don't die. What happens to the bone?
Well, yeah, when they just get like weaker and weaker.
The bone will get weaker, of course, because these guys will go and eat it and eat it and eat it, right?
Yeah.
Make sense? So as any destructive cell, they have to die at the end of their task, like T cells. So what activates osteoclasts? Parathyroid hormone and certain T cell secreted proteins. So how remodeling is controlled? It can be controlled by the negative feedback for the calcium homeostasis in the blood. Give me 4 minutes and I will let you go. Let's talk about negative feedback and I will let you go. We're not going to talk about mechanical and gravitational forces today. So calcium. I told you that the calcium is critical in the nerve impulse transmission. We already learned that. Contraction of the muscle, blood coagulation, cell division, and secretions by the glands. We have about 3 pounds of calcium in a body, and 99% of that calcium is in the bone. The concentration in the blood is very tightly regulated, about 9 to 11 milligram per deciliter. And when we eat it, when we eat calcium-containing products, its absorption, intestinal absorption, requires vitamin D. That's why if you're sitting in a dark room, calcium is not going to get absorbed. So how is that regulated? It's regulated by parathyroid hormone, which is produced by parathyroid gland, and calcitonin maybe, but normal calcitonin concentrations don't seem to do much to the calcium level. So parathyroid hormone is released in response to the low calcium in the blood. Now I want to highlight this thing. That's a very important concept. Parathyroid hormone will remove calcium from the bone regardless of bone integrity, no matter how good your bones are. If you are fracturing in every bone, it doesn't matter. If you need calcium, parathyroid hormone will stimulate osteoclasts. So what exactly happens? We'll go through that slide and that's it. I'll let you go. So decreased levels of calcium in the blood will be sensed by parathyroid gland that will release parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone will stimulate osteoclasts that will degrade the bone matrix and release calcium into the blood. Levels of calcium in the blood go up, parathyroid gland senses it and stops releasing of parathyroid hormone. What kind of feedback is that?